Throughout our scriptures, there's this storyline that threads itself through each generation. What ends up happening is that throughout these scriptures, there's heroes. And these heroes are individuals that we now lift up and talk about. But the common experience of all these heroes in the scriptures was that they never thought they were heroes. In essence, they were caught unaware. They were caught unaware as God invited them into the story of God to serve a purpose and to change the world. And so this month, we're looking at these stories of unlikely heroes. People that didn't sign up and chase after stardom as a hero, but instead found themselves in situations that we now would look at as heroes. Of course, often in these scriptures, we think about the big heroes, the big names of these scriptures. But if you look closely, there's countless heroes that happen to not only be men, but especially women. These scriptures revealed to us a countless number of women that help transform the world by being vessels of God. And so today we're going to turn to another woman who certainly didn't see herself as a hero and found herself unaware of what God's plan was for her life. Last week, Pastor Brandon began the series by looking at this common name of the New Testament time, Mary. And you studied Mary Magdalene. Well, today we're turning our attention, and maybe you're like me when you heard the passage, you're kind of like, is Christmas here already? Because when I hear this passage, I'm waiting for a little girl to walk out with a pillow underneath of her shirt because she's Mary, and a cute little boy come out in angel wings to proclaim the good news of the Christmas story. And to read this passage in July seems almost heretical. Are we heretics for looking at this passage out of season? Well, my hope is that we can gain a glimpse of this woman named Mary. For in these scriptures, there's countless Marys that have been servants of God. We have Mary Magdalene, Mary of Bethany, Mary of Jacob, and this Mary, Mary the Mother of God, the Virgin Mary, Saint Mary, however you want to define her, the Mary that makes this world possible because she becomes the womb of creation, of salvation. And so today, as we look into this Mary, I realize that some of you are ex-Catholics. Anyone here grew up in the Catholic tradition? Don't worry, you're safe. You see, I didn't know much about this Bible and all these people. I knew the story of David for the reason that my name is David. I'd heard about Jesus, and I heard about his mom named Mary. My senior year of high school, I went to a Catholic high school, and I heard a whole lot about Mary. And there was a veneration of Mary in a way that was pronounced, it was present, it was talked about constantly. And then when I was in college and came into faith, all of a sudden I only heard about Mary one time a year at the pageant, and when this passage was read again. And in some ways, in our Protestant Reformation, trying to run away from that which was Catholic, we lost the beauty of this woman who becomes for us a symbol, a statement, a reality of who we are called to be as faithful children of God. So what do we know about this woman who has inspired arts and poetry, who has inspired countless generations of followers of Christ? Well, what we know about her is that she's not really anyone of any importance. In the ancient world, she was from this little town called Nazareth. In fact, when Jesus is calling disciples and one of them goes to tell another, they say, does anything good come from Nazareth? There's a backhanded statement about what's this town? It's a backwaters town of no consequence. Mary, it's believed, was about 14 years old when she gave birth to Jesus. Imagine a 14-year-old unwed, brand new mother in our world, and then make it even worse in an ancient world. Not only that, Mary doesn't come from a bloodline of individuals of importance. Whenever in Scripture you want to talk about the importance of an individual, you connect their bloodline to the person. But Mary's parents are never mentioned, which basically means that she was poor. She was a nobody, and she certainly would not be the hero that people expected. But Mary becomes for us an unlikely hero. Unlikely because no one's expecting it, including herself. The story that you just heard read goes like this. Mary is doing life in the normalcy of living when suddenly an angelic messenger shows up and says, "Good news!" And she's like, "What?" "You're going to be pregnant, and you're going to bear for this world a child." And she's like, "Yes!" "No. How can this be, since I'm yet a virgin? How can I bear the child of salvation if in fact I've never had any relationship?" An angel goes on to say, "Oh, don't you worry, the Holy Spirit will come upon you and you will conceive in your womb a child and he'll be great. In fact, he's going to be so great that we're going to call him Emmanuel, God with us." And her response, "I am the Lord's servant. May it be done according to your will." I am the Lord's servant. May it be done according to your will. Yes, I know what they're going to say and the gossip that's going to happen about this young woman with child not yet wed. I know what's going to happen to my life of trying to raise this child in the midst of a culture that's going to try to put us to shame. I am willing. You see, this unlikely hero that we find in Mary, the reason why she becomes a hero is because she is willing to do what God has invited her to do. John's gospel begins it this way. The Word was in the beginning. Everything that came into being was through the Word, and without the Word, nothing came into being. And what came into being through the Word was life. And the life was the light for all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish the lights. For a moment, maybe you're like me, and you think, Jesus is special, so I'm not really like Jesus. He was kind of perfect. And maybe you haven't thought much about Mary because we don't talk a lot about Mary, the mother of God. But for a moment, I want you to imagine that she's with child, and what she's holding within her is salvation. The light of the Word that becomes flesh and dwells among us. I imagine, like every other mother I know, those first butterfly kicks of the baby moving in her tummy, it must have tickled her, and she probably wept with joy. I would imagine that as Jesus grew in her womb and suddenly his elbow went arcing across her belly, she would call out to Joseph and say, "Come, you got to feel this. This is amazing." We know the story of his birth, right? Not in a palace, but in a stable. Imagine, like every other mother, she wept at the sight of this child. This one is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen. I imagine as he was beginning to learn how to walk, Jesus would be outside and running, and it's really rocky in that area where he lived. And he would fall and skin his knee and come running to Mama because his knee hurts. She would get down and pick up that little knee and give it a kiss to heal it. And everything was okay because Mama Mary had all the power in the world. I would imagine as Jesus was growing up, he got picked on like every other child in the world. He would come home with tears streaking down his face. And she would open up her arms of love and say, "You are okay. You are loved beyond measure. Don't listen to what they say about you. For I am your mom, and I love you." I imagine that as he got into school, the family donkey had a bumper sticker on the back of it that said, "My child is an honor roll student at Nazareth High School." And as that donkey walked down the street, she would be like, "That's my son, Jesus. That's mine." And then when he became a carpenter and began to build, she'd point out to all of her friends, "That's Jesus' work right there. That's my son's handiwork." As he begins to teach and to call disciples, In these scriptures, you always see Mary with Jesus, walking and watching. And as every other mother does, soaring in wonder and love. Look at my son. They love him. And she was probably like every other mother that was like, Pharisees, shh, do not talk to my son that way. I would imagine that as he gathered in the upper room, it wasn't just a bunch of guys in that room, but Mary must have been there with him. As she heard him predict his impending death, she kept saying, no, Jesus, you're my son, and I am your mother. Moms are to never bury their sons. As Jesus is crucified and nailed to the cross, Mary is there watching it. What are they doing to my son, oh God? How can they do this? Where are you? As they pierce Jesus' side with the spear, imagine that Mary felt pierced in her soul. My son. They're going to kill you, my son. And as Jesus died on that cross, I would imagine that Mary was like every other mother who died herself, seeing the death of her son. But Mary was different, because throughout these scriptures, it always talks about Mary was willing. She was willing to follow the plan of God even when she didn't like it, even when she fought against it, even when she didn't want it to be. And I would imagine here among us are unlikely heroes that are sitting right next to you that have been willing to do something profound in the world with no accolades and no plan. I think about school teachers, unlikely heroes that inspire new generations, that don't make a fortune and seldom get thanked. But day after day, they show up and they love on those kids. I think about the artists, the musicians, and the fine arts that aren't in it for the money, but are in it to inspire and give us pieces that change our lives. I think about those individuals here, those unlikely heroes that are willing to step out of their zones of comfort and into the world and the stage of discomfort in order to bring comfort to another. I think about those unlikely heroes that are here today that have gone out on the streets and served the least and the last, the poor and the marginalized. I think about those parents that are here among us that have worked multiple jobs to provide food for their families, that have sacrificed so much more than their kids could ever know to give them a life that they feel they're called to live. You see, among you are unlikely heroes, not chasing stardom, but doing what's right in front of you because you're willing. You're willing to step out of your zones of comfort and say yes to God. And as Mary sat with an angel who gives her this news that you are the one that the prophecy is going to be fulfilled in, a virgin will give birth to a child. Mary simply said, let it be. Unlikely heroes most often aren't well known. They're not well known for the sole fact that often their story is never told. Most often, unbeknownst to you, you become a hero in another person's life. And you may never realize it. And that's the beautiful economy of God's work in our world. But there's one that we've learned about in Poland who helped do something that very few others were willing to do. It was the closing years of World War II, and he was from Sweden. He saw the plight of what was happening and felt like he needed to be willing to do something for another. And so he left the safety of his home in Sweden and went to Hungary as a diplomat. And he began to live in a community that he was surrounded by Jews. As he began to converse and realized that he was starting to see people leaving and not coming home, he opened up a new embassy, the Swedish embassy, and hired 400 brand new employees who all happened to be Jewish. Because of this, all 400 of those individuals had immunity from the Nazis. They were safe. And people began to pat him on the back, saying, "Great job, you saved 400 people's lives." But he kept seeing every day more individuals leaving. And so he began to go out and buy homes and put a Swedish flag in the yard, symbolizing that this was now safe land because it was owned by Sweden. And he began to invite families to move into these homes underneath the protective covering of the Swedish flag. Suddenly, 400 became a couple thousand. And people, of course, were like, "What an amazing thing you're doing." But every day he'd look out and see more people leaving and realize that yet more needed to be done. So he began to get employees at the embassy to forge fake papers so that he could pass them out so that they would be able to have citizenship of Sweden. And he began to pass them out, but realized that they'd missed too many. And so he began to take his briefcase and walk down to the train yard. And as he sat and he listened to train cars full of men and women, he would begin to take these papers and slide them through the cracks. And as soon as he emptied his briefcase, he would go to the officers and say, "There are Swedish souls on that train. You must release them." And the doors would open, and out would come all these brand new Swedish citizens. It's believed that in a 2-year period, he saved upwards of 100,000 people because he was willing to step out of his own comforts and to say, "Here I am, God, use me." I wish I could tell you his story had a great ending, but at some point towards the end of the war, he was captured by the Russians. He was never seen again or heard from. And it wasn't until the 80s that Russia released that he died in their custody. He was about 35 years old. In 1981, President Reagan issued, for only the second time in American history, citizenship to an individual that never resided here, the first being Winston Churchill. And the Guinness Book of World Records still holds the title that he saved more souls from death than any other has lived. You see, the interesting thing about the story of Raoul Wallenberg isn't that he was some famous individual. In fact, for decades, no one knew who this was. But because he was willing, he saved upwards of 100,000 lives. And now, multiple generations later, millions of people. All because he was an unlikely hero that was willing. You may be thinking, "That's a neat story, but I can't. I'm not a diplomat. I can't save people like that." Or maybe I can't do it because I'm not strong enough or powerful enough. I can't because I'm not rich enough or connected enough. I'm not the right person. And all that God needs to hear from you is saying, not "I can't," but "I will. I will. I will be your servant. I will be open to what you'll do. I will be an unlikely hero to another." It's the call of God on each of us. Are you willing? Amen.